A Delta Airlines flight that landed at Toronto Pearson International Airport flipped over. And on that flight was Keanu Reeves. So, what did Hollywood's calmest man do in such a chaotic disaster? This isn't a movie scene. It's real life. And Keanu Reeves sprang into action to save lives. But first, drop a comment. What would you do in a situation like this? Or subscribe now so you never miss these kinds of events, and watch without taking your eyes off the screen. The plane was gliding through the sky. There were 25 minutes left before landing in Toronto. Keanu Reeves sat by the window, gazing into the dark sky. Since the beginning of the flight, an unease had been gnawing at him. He wasn't in a movie scene, nor was he facing death as dictated by a script. This time, everything was real. The atmosphere on board was calm, but a strange tension was palpable. Flight attendants passed by more frequently than usual, and the passengers fidgeted restlessly as if anxiously awaiting the landing time. Keanu could hear the elderly woman in the seat next to him murmuring prayers. Something was wrong. The captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have entered Toronto airspace. However, weather conditions may complicate our landing. Please keep your seatbelts fastened." Outside, the wind was battering the fuselage. Keanu wiped the fog off the window with his hand. Below, a snowstorm was unfolding like a white blanket. In that moment, his inner unease grew even stronger. Suddenly, the plane jolted as if an invisible hand was pulling it downward. Cries erupted. Overhead bins flew open, and one of the flight attendants lost his balance and fell to the floor. Keanu clutched his seat tightly, his breath coming in rapid gasps. The plane began its rapid descent. The captain's voice came through again, trembling. "Please, remain calm. We're regaining control," but control was slipping away. The plane was dangerously tilting toward the runway. Keanu tightened his seatbelt and held his breath. They weren't preparing for a landing. They were bracing for a collision. Then came a hard impact. The metal fuselage groaned, and the plane was thrown in one direction as everyone inside was rocked. Keanu's head hit the seat, and his vision went dark. For a moment, everything fell silent. But this was only the beginning. Everything was a blur. The screech of metal and the echo of people's screams filled his ears. Keanu tried to open his eyes, but his head was spinning. He felt a heavy pressure on his chest. His seatbelt was still fastened. The plane was skidding toward the end of the runway. It was tilted on its side, its wheels digging into the black ground. The cabin lights flickered, and oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling. A child was crying, and a man was gasping with wheezes. Instinct took over for Keanu. He unfastened his seatbelt and tried to sit up. The elderly woman in the seat next to him had lost consciousness. He gently shook her and said, "Hey, wake up! We need to get out!" The woman slowly opened her eyes, shocked but alive. Someone in the front rows shouted, "This place is on fire! We need to get out now!" Keanu turned his head. The right wing had torn off, and the engine was aflame. Time was running out. A flight attendant in front lay motionless. Keanu checked her pulse. She was still alive. He hoisted her over his shoulder and helped her stand. Panic was rising throughout the cabin. Some people rushed toward the exit while others remained frozen in shock. Keanu took a deep breath. "Everyone, stay calm. We have to exit in an orderly fashion." They recognized that voice. Keanu Reeves's voice. A few people turned toward him, their eyes opening in hope. It almost felt like a movie scene, but it wasn't. The fuselage creaked, and parts broke away, scattering outside. Time was running out. Keanu grabbed the elderly woman by the arm and moved forward. Behind him, someone collapsed, succumbing to injury. A small child was trapped between seats. Keanu quickly crouched down and freed the child. "All right, you're safe now," he said, handing the child over to his mother. The first exit door was completely sealed shut. They had to find another way out. A passenger shouted, "The rear door is open!" Keanu took a deep breath. They had to reach that door. Keanu Reeves struggled to steady his breathing as he made his way through the wreckage. The plane had flipped over, its ceiling now facing the floor. The orange glow of the flames lit up the cabin in a haunting manner. Shards of glass and torn pieces of seats posed obstacles with every step. A shrill scream rang out. A child. Keanu turned his head. A little girl, about 6 years old, was trapped among the overturned seats. Her small hands waved helplessly in the air. Quickly, Keanu crouched down. "Stay calm. I'm going to get you out," he said. The metal was as cold as ice. His hand slipped, and he cut his finger, but he didn't care. Gently, he pulled the little girl free and handed her tearfully to her waiting mother. Just then, the cabin shook again. The floor was sliding. A passenger lost his balance and collapsed onto his knees. "This place is collapsing!" someone shouted. Keanu lifted his head. A deep crack had opened in the ceiling. The metal beams creaked ever so softly. They could really give way at any moment. Panic was growing. People were pushing each other in search of an exit, and some were screaming. One man even began to pray. Then Keanu did what came to his mind first. He shouted in a loud, commanding voice, "Everyone, listen to me. We're going to get out of here, but first we need to stay calm. If we panic, no one will survive." All eyes turned toward him. His voice was clear, determined, and reassuring. One man frowned. "Why should we listen to you?" Keanu moved closer. "Because we have no other choice." Silence fell. People paused. Now he could direct them. "The first exit is sealed. We need to head for the rear door." A passenger asked, "But how are we going to reach it?" The plane was flipped over, filled with wreckage. What should have been a few steps turned into a labyrinth. Keanu brought a hand to his bleeding forehead. He needed to think. Time was running out. At that very moment, someone on the plane did something unexpected. Keanu Reeves's mind was racing. How could he get these panicking people out? At that moment, a young man tried to lift some debris with a metal rod, but the rod was slippery and heavy, and he lost his balance, falling backward. Keanu immediately rushed over and helped him up. "We can't afford any mistakes," Keanu said, his calm voice easing the fear in the young man's eyes a bit. Looking up at the ceiling, he quickly formulated a plan. The plane had flipped over, but the exit door was still at the rear. To reach it, they'd need to navigate through a narrow passage. "We all need to move through this section in order, children first." A little girl clung to her mother. Keanu took her small hands and said, "Follow me, okay?" The child nodded, and Keanu carefully guided her through the wreckage while her mother followed behind. The narrow passage seemed to close in with every step. Then, a creaking sound echoed. Part of the ceiling began to slide down. Keanu swiftly turned back, grabbed the arm of the man in front, and pulled him to safety. At the same moment, a heavy panel fell to the floor. If he had hesitated even a second, that man would have been crushed. "Keep moving! We don't have time!" Outside, sirens wailed. Rescue teams were approaching, but the exit door still wouldn't budge. Keanu's eyes caught sight of one of the cabin crew, a weary, elderly flight attendant sitting by the exit door, his eyes closing, clearly having lost much blood. Keanu approached him. "Can you hear me?" The attendant opened his eyes weakly. "We need to open the door, but it's locked." He inspected the door mechanism. It was jammed due to external pressure. "We're going to open it together." Making eye contact with everyone inside, Keanu shouted, "We all have to push together." 6 people gathered and charged toward the door. The door wavered. A little more. And suddenly, it swung open. A rush of cold air surged in. For a moment, everyone froze. Then, the shouts of rescuers from outside echoed. "Everyone, get out! Quickly!" One by one, people began to exit. Keanu was among the last. He turned back to the flight attendant and helped him up. As Keanu stepped outside, a cold wind hit his face. Snow was still falling, but they had made it. Yet, the feeling inside him was far from relieved, because he realized that someone was still trapped inside the plane. Keanu Reeves thought he was the last one to leave the plane, but he was mistaken. When he turned around, he saw a motionless silhouette in the darkest corner of the cabin. A passenger. Instinct took over. He turned back. "There's someone over there," he shouted, but firefighters warned, "It's too dangerous. You need to come." But Keanu had already started running. In the midst of chaos, every struggle he had fought for survival had prepared him for this moment. This wasn't a movie set, it was real. And one more life could still be saved. He plunged into the wreckage. The passenger was trapped in one of the seats. His hands trembled, and his breathing was irregular. "I'm going to help you." Keanu knelt, unfastened the passenger's seatbelt, and hoisted him onto his shoulder. It was heavy. Every step made it harder to breathe. But once they emerged from the dark cabin, the on-site doctors immediately took over. Finally, it was over. The passengers were wrapped in blankets and loaded onto rescue vehicles. People looked at Keanu in awe, but he simply stared into the distance. A reporter extended a microphone. "Mr. Reeves, why did you do that?" Keanu Reeves paused for a moment. Then he looked the reporter in the eye and said simply, "Because I had no other choice." If you've watched this far, I believe our story has touched you. But here's something I've noticed. You haven't subscribed yet, and that really saddens me. There are so many more incredible stories waiting to be told. Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and be a part of this journey. Plus, we share new content every day. Stay tuned to our channel so you don't miss our next video. See you in the next story. Click now and discover more real stories from Keanu Reeves.